Well, let's move on now to our focus report. And this Friday, we're looking at how France is trying to entice migrants to leave by paying for their flight home. The financial incentive is one of the measures put in place to deal with historic immigration levels. We take a look at how it works and how effective it can be.
This man arrived in France illegally in 2013. 3 years later, Debaba Koyazo is still undocumented. Now he's packing to go back to Congo.
I decided to go because I still don't have papers. So why would I stay? What would I do in France?
There are some 400,000 migrants in Debaba's position in France. The job of the Office for Immigration and Integration, or OFI, is to persuade them to leave. They're offered money and financial support for professional projects once home. Debaba's taken up the offer and has an appointment with an OFI representative at the airport.
Hello. Welcome to Lyon Airport. So it's the big day.
Yes, it's a big day for me.
Not only is his plane ticket paid for, but Debaba also receives an envelope with 2,000 euros in cash. That's a lot of money.
Yes, it's a lot, because this is a larger than usual package. The normal one is 650 euros. This time, it's 2,000 euros.
It's an extra incentive introduced after the Calais migrant camp was torn down at the end of 2016.
It's really worked, because we've seen a big increase in the number of people volunteering to leave since November and December. Just this month, we have about 100 people here in Lyon getting ready to leave.
Of course it motivated me. It's money, which will really help me as soon as I arrive. For any situation that may arise, it'll really help. So, I'm happy.
In 2016, 4,774 people elected to leave France with the incentive programme, a total cost of 6 million euros. It's an amount that the head of OFI can live with.
The state pays 10 times less for this programme than for forced deportation. Deportation means court, police guard to accompany people, and multiple plane tickets.
This is backed up by a Senate report, with the cost of the detention centre, expulsion and escort costs, and legal fees. Deporting someone adds up to a total of 19,800 euros. In the case of a voluntary return, travel costs plus the incentives programme and professional grant comes to between 2,000 and 5,000 per migrant. So how does this professional financing work? We're in Tunisia, where 500 migrants have returned, having benefited from this aid. These two French agents are in charge of checking up on the investments made by the French state. Khaled is a spice producer. After 2 years in France, he opted to return to Tunisia. To encourage him, OFI financed his workshop, this time not with cash, but by buying these machines for him.
So as of now, France has spent nearly 6,000 euros. The first installment was used to finance the biggest machines, these 4 machines that each grind different cereals or seeds.
And what would you say to those who say, in fact, you're financing former illegal immigrants?
Well, they'd be right, partly. But I think everyone can agree these former undocumented migrants are better off in Tunisia, at the head of a company, than living precariously in bad neighborhoods of French cities.
To avoid the system being abused, the agents come to check up on the company 5 times a year, scrutinizing everything from its machines to its accounts.
And what are your weekly figures in June, July and August?
Almost 400, 300, on average 400.
Some might be tempted to take this as a boon. Opportunists might be tempted to sell the equipment as soon as they get it, but they'd end up back at square one, in fact. They'd once again be unemployed and perhaps even tempted to emigrate illegally again.
If I went back to France now, it would be for tourism and to show the French that their help has been useful. I wouldn't abuse it. I work now.
How effective is the program? French senators are quite certain the financial aid works and should be developed further.
This policy is the way of the future. Indeed, we're well aware of how difficult it is to make those who've been denied asylum leave. We know that many irregular migrants end up staying in France. So yes, once we decide that financial aid and investing in their home countries is the way forward, we will need to set aside a budget, and that'll be much more than the current 6 million euros.
France is not alone in wanting to develop this method. European countries such as Italy, Germany, Greece and Spain are also choosing to help migrants build their futures at home.
Well, for more on this, let me turn now to our guest. Gilles Spielvogel is an economist at the OECD's International Migration Division. Hello, thank you very much for being with us. Is this really a new measure?
No, assisted voluntary return programs have been around, especially in European countries, since the end of the 70s, at least. So basically, in the context of return migration, those assisted voluntary returns should be thought as a part of world return migration process. For instance, which is not a negligible phenomenon at all. For instance, in European countries, it is estimated that 25 to 50% of migrants will leave their destination country in about 5 years at maximum. And in the case of France, we have an inflow of immigrants of 200,000 per year, but there is also an outflow of immigrants of 100,000 per year. And so this program, Assisted Voluntary Return, in the case of France, it concerns about between 4,000 to 5,000 persons per year. So this is only a small fraction of the whole mobility of those migrants.
And why such a small fraction?
It's a small fraction because most people don't want to go back to their country of origin, sometimes for very good reasons. If they feel that they have no future for an economic point of view or for a security point of view, they will obviously want to stay in destination countries and hope for a better life for them and their children.
But obviously sometimes the alternative is forced deportation.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So for people who have been in irregular situation and been arrested, they faced forced deportation. So this is, in a sense, those assisted voluntary returns programs are meant to be an alternative to forced return. So in a sense, they are voluntary only to the extent that there are this alternative with forced return.
And can you tell us a bit more about the profile of those who are allowed to be given this aid?
So there are several conditions to be met to be given this aid. First, you have to be in a irregular situation for at least 6 months in France. You have to be voluntary. You have to want to return voluntarily to your origin country. And one important condition is that this aid cannot be given several times. It's only once.
So we saw one migrant in that report there being given 2,000 euros to leave the country, as well as his flight ticket. Isn't there a risk of this being counterproductive, perhaps, with some saying that it could actually incite more people to come to France because they'll know that if ever they can't make it in France, that'll be their plan B?
Yes, that's an interesting. That's an important point. But first, we need to clarify that there are actually two types of aid. There is the aid for return proper, and what we are talking about in this report was aid for assistance for reintegration, which can be the amount that you have cited. But
to set up a business, for example.
Exactly, to set up a business. So, to what extent does might that lead to them to succeed or fail? There are several factors here. First of all, there has to be a business project that is actually viable, and there are the economic conditions, the political conditions in the origin country must be also favorable for the success of this kind of business project. And finally, there is also the need to have a long-term accompaniment of those projects, of those migrants, for the success of this kind of projects.
Now, as you mentioned, for France, for example, about half of the number of migrants who come into France will then leave France. Do all those people go home?
They don't necessarily go home. In the context of those assisted voluntary returns, they do go home. But in general, migrants will leave any country, might go anywhere they want, if they have, of course, the visa that can get them access to the country where they want to go.
And is there also an issue of how we appreciate the motives and motivations for these migrants' arrival in France? I mean, here we're talking about economic migrants. Is there a single profile of an economic migrant?
There is obviously no single profile of migrant in general and no single profile of economic migrant. Migrants have very different motivations to come to France. As you mentioned, some people are coming to work because they have been hired by a company to work in France, for instance. And this is obviously the majority of economic labor migrants in France, for example. There are migrants who come to join their family. There are migrants who come to study and then find that they like to stay and work in the country.
Thank you very much for having spoken to us, Spielvogel. Once again, you are an economist at the OECD's International Migration Division. Thank you for your analysis. Well, that's where we're leaving this hour live from Paris. Stay tuned. We'll have a full news update at the top of the hour.